Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Nero Wolfe and Fritz's Forgotten Sauce. At 11 minutes past 9, the doorbell rang. I was in the front room, sorting through a stack of bills Wolfe had declared offensive to his digestion and beneath his attention. He was in the plant rooms, where the humidity suited his orchids and his distaste for interruptions. The bell rang again, less patient this time. I opened the door. She was dressed in cream, not white, cream, with undertones of antique gold, the way champagne looks just before the bubbles die. Gloves to the wrist, hair the colour of chilled barley, swept back in a style I'd seen once on a Parisian actress, except this wasn't Paris. This was West 35th Street, Manhattan, and the woman was watching me with the precision of someone taking inventory. "Good morning," she said, her accent wrapping the vowels like silk. "My name is Veronica Santillane. I wish to speak with Mr. Wolfe." She didn't blink when she said it. Most people do. They pause, expecting resistance or a flourish of conditions. She didn't. I stepped aside. "May I ask the nature of your business?" She entered, the way one might step into an embassy or a cathedral. Not a hair out of place, not a scuff on her heels. She didn't bother answering me. She looked at the walls, the chairs, the rug with a studied calm and turned to face me again. "I believe Mr. Wolfe may recognize this," she said, and withdrew from her handbag an envelope. Not thick, not torn. The postmark read, August 19th, 1944, New York, N. The name was written in neat blue ink. Nero Wolfe, Esquire. I took it. The envelope bore no return address. The seal was old but intact. "You understand I can't let you speak with him until—" "I understand perfectly," she said, with a nod that was diplomatic, not submissive. "You are his assistant. Mr. Goodwin, is it?" I inclined my head and showed her to the red chair. She sat as though it were made of marble. I left her there and headed for the plant rooms. Wolfe was at the east bench, his back to the door, fussing with a Vanda coerulia that had developed a spot of mildew. I cleared my throat. "A woman named Veronica Santillane is in the office. Says she's a widow and has something you may recognize." He didn't turn. "Did she say what it was?" "Nope, but she handed me an envelope addressed to you, dated 1904. That did it." He turned slowly. His expression didn't change, but I've worked with the man long enough to see the twitch of interest in his eyes when something old digs up something older. "Very well," he said, brushing his hands off with the cloth he kept folded in his vest. "Show her in." When I returned to the office, she hadn't moved. She was looking out the window toward the brownstone across the street. It was mid-October and the trees outside were losing the last of their leaves. She turned only when Wolfe entered and stood. He crossed the room to his yellow chair and lowered himself into it without offering greeting. He nodded once. She responded with a shallow bow of her head. "Mr. Wolfe?" "You've come far," he said. "Buenos Aires, I presume?" "Yes." "And why?" She laid the envelope on the desk between them. Wolfe reached for it. He turned it over. His fingers traced the seal but didn't break it. "I have not seen this since it was sent," she said. "It was part of my husband's private correspondence. He died in 1948. I found it 2 years ago, among papers that should not have survived." Wolfe broke the seal with a flick of his thumb. Inside was a single folded page. I remained where I was, leaning by the globe, watching him scan it once, then again. His lips thinned. "Where did you find it?" he asked. "In a compartment of his desk. The desk had been shipped to a warehouse in Rosario, where his shipping company kept old equipment." "The desk had not been opened until 2 years ago." "No. After his death it was crated. When I had it moved, the compartment dislodged." "And you waited 2 years to come?" "I waited until I knew what I had found," she said, her voice calm but not emotionless. "The name on the envelope, yours, I did not know it, but the contents of the letter made reference to something else, a brokerage firm in New York, and a forged passport." Wolfe looked down at the letter again. He did not invite elaboration, nor did she offer it. I stepped forward. "Forged passport?" I asked. "You mean someone faked your husband's identity?" "No, someone used it." Her gaze flicked to me. "After his death, or what was said to be his death, I don't rattle easily, but the way she said it, dry, measured, with the weight of doubt shaped by years, made the air in the room feel colder. Wolfe leaned back. "You suspect your husband is alive?" "No, I suspect someone wanted him not to be, and that someone here profited from it." She pulled from her bag a small embossed card. "This is the name of the firm, Westlake and Brothers. Their records show that in 1949, a series of property transfers took place in Manhattan, involving accounts in the name of Santillan Trading Company. That company had been dissolved in 1948, after my husband's death." I took the card. The address was in Midtown. "And you believe the letter," Wolfe said, tapping the paper with his index finger, "is linked to those transfers?" "I believe the man who wrote the letter knew the truth, and I believe that man was your client." Wolfe turned the letter toward me. I read the name, Frederick L. Darnell. The name rang a bell, not loudly but enough. I'd seen it on a list once, clients from the war years, mostly financial types who came to Wolfe when numbers didn't match and wives disappeared with cash. "Darnell's dead," I said. "Yes," she replied, "since 1945, the same year the letter was sent." Wolfe's fingers drummed once against the desk. "Mrs. Santillan," he said, "your husband's company, was it involved in foreign contracts during the war?" "Yes, freight transport. We supplied materials to American forces in Africa." "Legally?" Her lips twitched. "As legally as most companies operating under Peron." That got a grunt from Wolfe. He folded the letter and set it aside. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to find the truth," she said. "Not about my husband's death. I know he died. I saw the casket. I want to know who used his name, who moved his money, and who received a forged passport stamped by your own country." "Why not the police?" "I have been to them. They were polite. They were skeptical. They filed a report and sent me to an embassy, who sent me to another department, who asked if I had proof. I do not. Only a letter, and a name, and a trail of money that ends in this city." Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. "I dislike financial cases," he said. "I understand. But I dislike more the idea that someone used the dead to launder themselves." She inclined her head again. "Then you accept?" He looked at the letter. "No, not yet." I knew that tone. It meant maybe. She stood, smoothing her gloves. "If you decline, I will go to someone else. But I preferred to begin here. My husband once said, 'In America, there is a man with orchids who sees through ledgers.' I hoped he meant you." She left without fanfare. When the door closed behind her, Wolfe said nothing. He didn't move. He stared at the letter as if it might recite itself. I picked it up and read it again. Darnell had written to warn Wolfe that he suspected one of his wartime clients had falsified shipping records tied to materials marked non-military, but insured at military rates. He didn't name names, but the date matched the year Santillan had visited New York under diplomatic license. "Archie," Wolfe said, eyes still closed, "get me a list of transactions from Westlake and Brothers between 1946 and 1950. Use Saul if necessary." "Do we accept the case?" "We accept the question," he said. "We shall see if it leads to a case." I nodded and moved to the phone, and in the silence that followed, the name Santillan curled in the air like smoke from an old war, still smouldering. The sign outside read Westlake and Brothers, Investment and Financial Advisory. Bronze letters, weathered slightly around the edges, as if money itself had been walking in and out since 1895, and took its time doing so. Inside, the place smelled like polished wood and long-term liability. A receptionist, hair-pinned and start-sharp, eyed me the way you'd check a check. I handed her a card. "Mr. Denton Westlake," I said. "I've an appointment." She took the card, vanished through a door, and returned moments later. "This way." His office was large, north-facing, and standoffish, just like the man himself. Denton Westlake rose slowly as I entered, smoothing the creases of a grey pinstripe suit that had been tailored to a man who disliked conversation and distrusted daylight. He offered his hand. I took it. His grip was correct but reluctant. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "please, sit down." The chair was green leather, real, cracked slightly on the arms, a step above municipal, a step below clubroom. He remained standing. "You're with Mr. Wolfe." "I am." "To what do I owe the curiosity of West 35th? A woman arrived yesterday, I said, with a letter from 1944 and a name that popped up in your files 5 years later. She believes funds were moved through your firm after her husband's death, under false identity. He didn't blink. And her name? Veronica Santillan. He moved to his desk. His fingers rested on the blotter. I'm sorry. I don't believe I've ever conducted business with a Santillan, nor with any Argentinian party. I nodded slowly. That's the official line? It's the accurate one. He sat now directly across from me. The desk between us was walnut, uncluttered. The lamp was brass, the ashtray empty. But the picture frame just left of the telephone caught my eye. I leaned a little. Sepia-toned, slightly faded, the photograph showed a dinner party. 7 men, jackets off, ties loosened, caught mid-toast. One of them, second from the right, was unmistakable. Square jaw, a cleft chin, a nose that had seen 2 boxing rings and 1 revolution. Alejandro Santillan. Nice photo, I said casually. Where was it taken? He glanced at it and shrugged. Old friends. New York. 43, I believe. I tapped my index finger on the armrest. Funny, I said. The man at the far right, your old friend, happens to be the husband of the woman I mentioned. He died in Buenos Aires in 1948, which means either your memory is excellent or your denial is. I said I never did business with him, Westlake replied, crisp now. Friendship is not the same as fiduciary obligation. You remember him? Of course. You said you didn't recognize the name. I said I never dealt with a Santillan in my books. Personally, yes, briefly. We were introduced at a dinner arranged by a shipping client. It was unremarkable. So unremarkable, I said. You kept the photo for nearly a decade. He didn't smile. Some dinners are memorable for who else attends, he said. Alejandro was charming, spoke 5 languages, fluent in leverage too. That photo, I said, may place him in Manhattan a few weeks before he wired over $400,000 in insured freight premiums through shell accounts. Records suggest they cleared via this firm. That's impossible, I waited. He adjusted his cufflink. I won't insult your intelligence, Mr. Goodwin, but you're mistaken. I sat back. Am I? Yes, because I know the law. You need warrants, not insinuations. And until such a time as one arrives, I will not have you imply criminal mismanagement. I'm not implying anything, I said. I'm asking questions. You are baiting. Call it line and sinker, then. He stood. You have what you came for. I'm not sure I do. He moved to the door. You said no dealings with South American clients, but you remember Alejandro Santillan. You remember the photo. You said you hadn't done business with him. But that's not the same as saying he wasn't a client of someone in this firm. He opened the door. Be careful, Mr. Goodwin. In finance, words are currency, and you are dangerously close to insolvency. I stepped out into the hallway. The receptionist watched me go. I nodded politely. Down the lift, out into the street. I walked a few blocks, found a bench and lit a cigarette. The matchbook was from a bar Wolfe disapproved of and never visited. My watch read 12:30. I took the picture in my mind, Westlake's photo, and replayed it. 7 men, 1 dinner, 1 lie too neat for the room. When I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe was seated, his hands steepled. He deflected, he asked. He pretended not to know her husband, then admitted it, claimed no business dealings, only a dinner. But the photo on his desk tells more. Alejandro Santillan was there, in Manhattan, in 1943. Before the transfers? 2 years, but that's enough runway for a paper trail and a motive. Wolfe grunted. Did he protest? Like a banker, precisely, without passion, but firm. Wolfe opened the envelope again, the one Veronica had brought. He reread the line mentioning a brokerage. His lips twitched. We shall see, he said. We shall see how much Denton Westlake remembers when presented with the proper ledger. I nodded. The ledger hadn't surfaced yet, but the picture had. And pictures, like dead men, don't lie. The man was waiting at the corner of West End Avenue and 77th, near a tobacconist's that hadn't changed its signage since 1931. He wore a brown felt hat and a coat that had seen 10 winters. His posture was that of a man who had once stood straight by regulation and now stood carefully by habit. Clive Ransom had the look of a man who remembered too much and had learned not to say it. I approached from the west, hands in my coat pockets, eyes on the overcast sky. "Mr. Ransom," I said. He nodded once. "You're Mr. Goodwin." "That's right." He jerked his head toward the alley beside the tobacconist's. "We walk." I followed. The alley was quiet, the walls damp with city seepage. The morning had been warm, but the afternoon carried the chill of secrets. Ransom lit a cigarette with fingers that had once cuffed smugglers, now trembling slightly with arthritis. "Mr. Wolfe said you'd be direct." He wasn't wrong. He drew deeply. "You're asking about Alejandro Santillan." "I am." He exhaled. The smoke curled upward, slow and measured. "He came in 1943. Diplomatic immunity. One of the first Argentine freight magnates to get clearance under Roosevelt's quiet initiative with the Southern Corridor." "Meaning?" "Meaning he was allowed in with no questions asked, no luggage checks, and no stamps the State Department didn't want printed." "Convenient," I said. "Necessary," he replied, "for the war effort." We walked a few paces. A truck passed on the avenue behind us. "His papers?" I asked. "Perfect," he said. "Too perfect." He paused beside a trash can and flicked ash with the care of a man who didn't like to litter. "He came with a diplomatic pouch," he continued, "uninspected, twice. Once in 43, once in early 45. "And both times?" I prompted. "Straight to Westlake and Brothers," he said, quietly. "Not to the consulate." That landed. "You're sure?" I was the agent assigned. I logged the route, watched the car leave the terminal and follow Park Avenue south. The second trip, he didn't even notify the embassy. He was met by two men in grey coats with American accents. One of them was Harold Deems, the other, Denton Westlake. My breath clouded briefly in the alley's cold. "What did he bring?" I asked. "That's the question, isn't it?" He turned to me. I wasn't allowed to inspect. Diplomatic pouch, classified clearance. But later that year I intercepted a shipment at Pier 92, mislabeled medical equipment. Inside, silver. Melted down, bars, coded marks, Latin initials. "ST?" "Yes. Santillan Trading." He looked around. "You didn't get that from me." I nodded. "Of course." "There's more," he said. He wasn't alone. A woman travelled with him, not named, no passport. "Veronica?" "Describe her." "Blonde, mid-30s, spoke only in Spanish. I was told she was a domestic aide, but her gloves were too clean and she didn't carry the bags." "You ever see her again?" "No, not until the funeral notice. 1948. Buenos Aires. Widow of the esteemed Alejandro Santillan. Buried with honours." He spat. "That man wasn't dead." "Why do you say that?" "Because in 1949 I saw him again, in a brokerage in Midtown. He had a new name, a new haircut, but the same gold ring on his left hand, same gait. I didn't confront him, I reported it." "And?" "The file vanished." I stared at him. "Disappeared?" "Like his death certificate." We stood in silence. "He used immunity," I said, "to bring in silver and vanish." "Yes." "And now?" "Now he's a ghost," Ransom said, "but ghosts leave trails." I took out my notebook. "Can you give me the file number for the report?" "I can." He leaned in and whispered it. "I can't testify," he said. "Why not?" "They'd come for me next. You understand?" I did. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "he's not planning to involve the police?" "Not yet." "Good." He flicked his cigarette to the curb. "One more thing," he said. "In 46, a warehouse in Red Hook burned. It held confiscated shipments, including one labelled ST, Winter Textiles. But no fabric was ever recorded. I went there 2 days before the fire. The crate was lead-lined and cold." "Cold?" "Like it held ice, or bodies." He walked away. I watched him go until the hat vanished around the corner. Then I turned, buttoned my coat, and started walking. The ghosts were warming up. Ask ChatGPT I'd trailed more men to lunch than to funerals, which may say something grim about New York's priorities. Denton Westlake was punctual, I'd give him that. He exited his building on Park and 46th just past 12:15, with the composure of someone expecting to be watched but not followed. I gave him 50 yards. He walked like a man with a schedule, but no conscience. The Blue Lantern was a holdover from Prohibition, narrow facade, leaded glass, name painted in blue cursive, half rubbed away. The interior was dark wood, polished brass, quiet jazz. Men dined here who didn't want to be seen dining. That made it useful. I took the back table by the side mirror. From that vantage I could see the entire front section without turning my head. Westlake entered and was seated without speaking to the maitre d'. A server brought a water carafe before he took off his coat. He wasn't alone for long. A minute later, a thin man entered. Greying temples, damp forehead, half-buttoned overcoat. His collar was slightly askew, which annoyed me more than it should have. He walked like a man unused to invitations and unsure how long they'd last. The man was Harold Deems. I'd seen him once before, years back, when a bond fraud case brushed Wolfe's carpet. Freight insurance, mid-level analyst at St. Catherine's and Barrow, now listed as Assistant Director for International Maritime Risk. His specialty had been loss reports, fires, accidents, uninspected containers that vanished with indemnity. He shook Westlake's hand stiffly, then sat. They ordered. I didn't hear what. My own server brought tomato bisque and a roll with the confidence of a man who knew I wasn't here for lunch. I didn't watch them directly. Reflections and rhythm would do. Their conversation was careful. Westlake kept his voice low, his chin angled. Deems spoke less. He'd lean in, nod, tap the edge of his knife against the plate in small ticks. His hands fidgeted with the napkin, folding and refolding. Westlake kept glancing toward the entrance, but not once behind him. Good. I caught 3 phrases, clean through the jazz and dish clatter. They'll never reopen the file. Then later, ledger was filed under a new manifest code. And finally from Deems, after a sip of water, leaning in closer than before, the switch was before the fire. I stopped mid-chew. Westlake nodded, his mouth tight. They didn't speak again for nearly 2 minutes. Deems rubbed the back of his neck. Westlake signalled for the check. That was all. They left in opposite directions. I let them go. 10 minutes later, I paid and walked out into a sharp wind that reminded me how much I preferred Fritz's kitchen to espionage over soup. By the time I reached the brownstone, Wolfe was seated and motionless, his hands steepled, eyes closed. I entered without announcing myself. I take it your tale proved fruitful, he said, without opening his eyes. I removed my coat. Westlake met with Harold Deems at the Blue Lantern. They dined quietly, coded chatter, the sort of phrases that make a man nervous enough to leave his coffee untouched. He opened his eyes now. Details. They were cautious. I heard a few things. 1, they'll never reopen the file. 2, ledger was filed under a new manifest code. He grunted. And the third, I said, was the charm. Yes. The switch was before the fire. That opened his eyes fully. He leaned forward. That, he said softly, is interesting. I nodded. Deems worked at St. Catherine's and Barrow in 47. The Red Hook warehouse fire. 6 claims filed, 2 denied. 1, marked for wartime silver shipment under code ST, was paid without inspection. Amount, $98,000. Which you verified. Last week, quietly. Wolfe sat back. So, he said, they're not worried about reopening the case. Not unless someone finds the original manifest, I said. And if the switch was before the fire, then the fire, Wolfe finished, was deliberate. Precisely. He closed his eyes again. That crate, I said, was lead-lined, according to Ransom, cold to the touch. Implying perishables, Wolfe said, or contraband in need of shielding. Silver, I said, or something more volatile. He opened his desk drawer and withdrew the letter Veronica had brought, the original postmark, August 1944, New York, written by Frederick L. Darnell. He unfolded it carefully. It mentions a shipment misfiled. That file, he said, tapping the air, is the one Deems just confessed to renaming. So the ledgers were real. Yes. And the fire, I said, was to cover the swap. Indeed. He reached for the beer Fritz had placed silently on the coaster 5 minutes before. Deems, he said, is a weak link. He speaks without meaning to. He folds napkins while lying. That's a man afraid. I sat. He's pale, I said. His hands tremble. The way he looked at Westlake wasn't deference, it was fear. My guess? He kept copies. That, Wolfe said, would be very convenient. He sipped the beer. Tomorrow, he added, you will visit St. Catherine's and Barrow. I want their annual reports. Anything with Deems's name attached. Look for claim adjustments between 1946 and 1948. Any pretext? Say we're preparing an audit for a third-party maritime arbitration. If they press, cite the Treaty of Montevideo. They won't know it. I stood. Saul? Use him, quietly. I turned to leave. Wolfe spoke again, this time more softly. Mr. Santillan, he said, did not die in Buenos Aires. No. He vanished. Yes. And someone, he added, eyes closing again, burned a warehouse so he could stay vanished. I nodded. Outside, the wind had picked up, and somewhere in Midtown, a man who folded napkins was wishing he hadn't said quite so much. The Red Hook fire was 17 years cold, but ash lingers longer in some places than others. The warehouse itself had been razed in 48, a year after the blaze. The official report claimed the structure had been too unstable to preserve. What stood there now was a lot full of rusted-out trailers and silence, but not far off, 2 blocks east, was the archive building for Monroe Fidelity and Transport, the insurance underwriter on the Red Hook warehouse claims. I had a name, an appointment, and a cover story. Wolfe preferred a touch of obfuscation when retrieving ghosts from burned buildings. The lobby was musty and over-tiled. A young man with wire-rimmed spectacles led me down a hallway that smelled of aged cardboard and radish salad. At the end was a long room with shelving that reached the ceiling, each labelled by year and incident code. Fire records for 1947, he said. Box 1219 contains the manifest logs. You can use the table. He left me alone. I opened the box. The documents were mostly intact, fragile around the edges, yellowed from poor ventilation and worse humidity. Each entry followed a uniform structure: shipment ID, company of origin, receiving party, valuation, inspection status, and remarks. I flipped through carefully, noting the types of goods: canned meats, surplus textiles, tin ore, cocoa beans, paraffin drums. Halfway through, I came across a page that had darkened along the bottom edge. Scorched. Not completely, but enough to curl the margin and blur the ink. The column headers remained readable. The shipment code read ST0113R. No company name was listed. Date received March 3rd, 1947. Inspection deferred. Destination NA. Final remarks. Not processed. Pending inspection order. That was the end of the entry. There was no signature, no valuation, just a dry space where a man should have put his name. The paper was stiff with soot and warped by water. The bottom third had charred into obscurity, but the code, ST, stood out in clean black ink. Santillan Trading. I turned the page slowly. The next sheet bore the same hand, the same format, but no mention of ST again. I returned to the charred page. There were 4 lines left under that entry. Blank. It wasn't common for manifest to leave entire sections blank. At Monroe Fidelity, nothing was left unitemized without cause. This was deliberate omission, possibly mid-process when the fire started, or someone halted the filing before it was completed. I marked the code down in my notebook and gently replaced the page in the file. Before I left, I checked the claim ledger. Claim number 11407. Filed April 2nd, 1947. Fire loss. Total $314,000. Approved $248,000. Memo. Claim includes 6 crates. Original manifest incomplete. Remaining documentation verified via revised intake records. I didn't know what revised meant, but I suspected someone had revised it very carefully. The staffer met me at the door. Did you find what you needed? Yes, I said. Just enough. I tipped my hat and left. The walk back to the subway took me past the old lot again. I stopped. A chain-link fence now surrounded it. Behind it, weeds clawed up through gravel, and a few half-melted concrete stumps poked through like bones from an unmarked grave. Someone had once built a business here. Someone else had burned it to keep it quiet. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had finished lunch but had not yet retired to the plant rooms. He sat in the yellow chair, half-reclined, fingers locked at the belly. I hung my coat. Red Hook is still burned out, I said. I know, he replied. Did you find the ledger? I did. Not all of it survived. Enough? Enough. I removed the notebook and placed it on the edge of the desk. One shipment, marked ST0M3R. Date received March 3rd, 47. No contents listed. Inspection deferred. No consignee listed. His eyes narrowed. No destination? No. That's a ghost shipment. That's what I thought. Was there a value? None listed. He moved only his fingers. Was there a claim? Yes. April 2nd, 6 crates, nearly $250,000 reimbursed, revised intake records. Wolfe's brow deepened. Who revised them? Unknown. There's no note of authorization, only that the original manifest was incomplete. Suggesting, he said, the intake was altered after the fire. Or before, I said. He nodded once. If before, then the fire concealed a crime. If after, it enabled it. He reached for the bottle Fritz had left. And the shipment code? ST. Wolfe's lips parted slightly. Santillan Trading, he said. Exactly. He took a long, slow sip. The company was dissolved after Alejandro's death, I said. But this shipment predates it by nearly a year. Wolfe set the glass down. Then the contents of that crate, he said, belonged to a man who was still alive, or a man who needed to appear dead. Whichever way we slice it, I said, those 6 crates never reached any destination. No, Wolfe said, they were never meant to. He stood. I watched him move to the shelves behind the desk. He pulled a thick brown volume, Trade and Tariff Records, Southern Corridor, 1941-48. He flipped it open without haste. Santillan Trading, he said, scanning the index. They operated as a private intermediary for Argentine freight until June 1948. Dissolution filed in Buenos Aires in August. No successor corporation. So, where did the money go? He closed the book. Into the fire, he said, with the truth. There was silence for a time. Mr. Goodwin, he said, yes? Find out who filed claim number 1407, the name on the form. Understood. And if possible, he added, find the original ledger clerk, if they still breathe. He turned back toward the yellow chair. I stepped into the hall. From the office, his voice followed me. Santillan, he said, never intended that crate to be found. No, I thought, but someone else had, and they'd done it by fire. The front door shut behind her with a sound too gentle for Manhattan. I stepped back into the office ahead of her and stood aside as she entered. Elegant, unhurried, composed in the way only someone carrying weight knows how to be. Wolfe was in the yellow chair. He had not risen. The room was thick with lamplight, filtered through the late afternoon's dimming overcast. The orchid clock ticked behind the closed doors of the plant rooms. Veronica Santillan paused halfway between the desk and the chairs. Her gloves were off. She held them in one hand like folded letters. Her gaze swept the room, briefly toward the fireplace, the globe, the window, and finally to Wolfe himself. Please, he said, with a nod toward the red chair nearest the corner. She sat. The hem of her skirt barely brushed the edge of the carpet. I moved behind her and took my usual perch. She did not turn. Wolfe clasped his hands over his belly. You said, he began, that your husband did not wish to be buried in Buenos Aires. She inclined her head once. Yes. Yet he was. That is what they told me. When was the last time you saw him? February 1948, she said, 3 days before his supposed death. Wolfe lifted one brow. You use that word with precision. I do. She unfastened the clasp of her handbag and withdrew a narrow envelope. Aged, yellowed and sealed with a small circle of dark wax. I was given this by the family solicitor, she said, after the funeral. It contains his burial request. Wolfe made no motion. She set it carefully on the edge of the desk. I reached for it. It was addressed in a hand I'd seen once before, on the 1944 letter to Wolfe. The ink was faded, the paper brittle. I passed it across to him. Wolfe opened it slowly, read once and exhaled through his nose. If I die in exile, he quoted, I am to be cremated, scattered at sea, no marble, no Catholic procession, and no soil that bears flags. Veronica nodded. That is his writing. It is. Was it honoured? No. Wolfe folded the paper back into its envelope. They buried him with a bishop, she said, cortegio official, Hymns, a plaque with birth and death reversed in order. Who arranged this? His brother, Jaime. Wolfe's fingers flexed. You were not consulted. I was informed, she said, after it was done. There was no viewing. The casket was sealed when I arrived. Doctor's report? Embolism at his desk. Coroner? None. His brother signed the certificate. Wolfe grunted. A man may be buried without a body. Yes. He studied her face now, her posture, her voice. You believe he did not die? I believe, she said, that someone needed him dead. Wolfe remained still. I watched her, and I saw it. Just behind the tone, the stillness, the certainty. It wasn't grief, it was something colder. Dislocation. I need you to understand, she said, that Alejandro was not a good man. Not by any measure that earns a saint's eulogy. She paused. He traded favors with generals. He bribed customs clerks. He invested in American steel from money earned in Bolivian tin. He was a patriot only when it paid. But he was mine, and I knew when he lied. She leaned slightly forward in the red chair. In January of 1948 he received a call. I was in the study. He took it in Spanish, but I understood enough. It was from New York. He said nothing that made sense, not names, not dates, but when he hung up, he poured himself a cognac and lit a cigarette he had not touched in 6 months. And he said, "They want me to die before I've finished." Wolfe blinked once. You did not ask what he meant. I did, she said. He told me, some shipments don't cross oceans, they vanish in fire. I asked him who. He kissed my forehead and said, "You will know if I vanish, not if I die." Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. And 3 weeks later, she continued, I received a call from Jaime. Alejandro had died. There was no autopsy. The body was sealed. The will, rewritten without my knowledge, had been filed a week earlier. Wolfe opened his eyes. You did not contest it? I tried, but the firm was dissolved before I arrived. The accounts were drained, and the consul told me to grieve quietly for the sake of dignity. She met his gaze. There was no dignity, only silence. Wolfe sat very still. You believe he returned to New York? I believe he never left. And that he faked his death? Or someone else did? Wolfe reached for a pen. He made no notes. He only tapped the end against his palm. When a man of Santillan's trade dies, he said, there are usually two certainties, enemies and evidence. She nodded. You have found the second, she said. I need you to find the first. He looked at me. I gave him a small nod. The ledger, the shipment, the fire, all of it pointed in one direction. And now Veronica had given it voice. Wolfe set the pen down. Tell me, he said, what did you bury? She tilted her head slightly. A casket. With weight? Yes. With scent? No. Then, he said, perhaps we buried papers, or bricks, or promises. She did not smile, but the corners of her mouth moved just faintly. May I ask you something, Mr. Wolfe? He nodded. Do you believe, she said, a man can erase himself with a single fire? He considered it. No, he said, not if someone remembers the match. She rose. I will return, she said, when you have something. He did not rise. He never did. But he watched her walk to the door, gloves folded again in her hand like unfinished letters. After she left, the room was still for a long time. The envelope remained on the desk. Wolfe spoke without looking up. We must know what was in that crate. I'll find out. Yes. He leaned back. And Archie, he added. Yes. She believes he's alive, but she is prepared for the opposite. So are we. No, Wolfe said, eyes closed now. We are preparing for something worse. I didn't ask what. I already knew. It was just before noon when the doorbell rang. I was halfway through a roast beef sandwich Fritz had begrudgingly prepared early, and Wolfe was leafing through his second volume on Peruvian botany when the chime sounded again, longer this time, and insistent. I pushed back from my desk, wiped my fingers and headed to the front. No need to bellow, I muttered, swinging the door open. Inspector Kramer stood on the stoop, red-faced, steam practically rising from his hat brim. Where is he? He growled. In his damn greenhouse. Afraid not, I said. Yellow chair, same as always. He pushed past me without ceremony, as usual, and made his way into the office, dripping rainwater onto the rug as he went. I followed behind, just in time to see Wolfe glance up with monumental displeasure. "Inspector!" "Don't inspector me!" Kramer snapped, removing his hat and flinging it onto the windowsill. "I should have known when you asked about ransom that this would turn into a circus." Wolfe set his book aside, reluctantly. "Clive Ransom is dead," Kramer said flatly. Wolfe didn't blink. "How?" "In his apartment on Bleecker. Gas. Unlocked window, no sign of forced entry, nothing missing. No struggle? No bruising, no defensive wounds, nothing. Just a man in his undershirt, face down on the floor between the radiator and a crate of invoices from 1946. I raised a brow. Invoices? Shipping manifests. Outgoing, mostly garbage. Wolfe shifted in his chair. "I presume you came to announce that my inquiries are now to cease." Kramer planted himself in the red chair across from Wolfe's desk and leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I came," he said, "to find out why you're digging up ghosts from the war, asking about Santillan and blacklisted shipments, and I want to know what you didn't tell me about Ransom." "I told you all I knew," Wolfe said mildly. "You told me he used to work customs," Kramer spat. "You didn't say he was the one who signed off on the Santillan manifest from 44, the one you asked me to look for." Wolfe's lips compressed. "And now," Kramer continued, "he's dead. On the same morning you send me a list of fingerprint matches to verify from 1944. "Purely a coincidence," Wolfe said, almost bored. "Like hell." He turned to me. "And you," he said, "you were at Ransom's building 2 nights ago." "Only the lobby." "Did he speak to you?" "He didn't even open the door." Kramer grunted. "Well, someone got to him last night. Gas was left open long enough to make sure he wouldn't be talking to anybody." Wolfe folded his hands. "And yet," he said, "they left the invoices. Curious." Kramer squinted. "What's curious?" "If he was silenced to keep a secret buried," Wolfe said, "why not burn the documents? Tear them up? Remove them entirely?" "Maybe they were just trash." "Or maybe," Wolfe said, "they weren't what they appeared." Kramer looked between us, jaw working. Then he exhaled sharply. "I know that face," he said. "That's your, you've got a theory you won't share yet face." "Possibly." "I don't have time for riddles, Wolfe." "You've made that clear." Kramer leaned back, scowling. "I want to know what you think Ransom was hiding, and I want to know now." Wolfe regarded him in silence for a moment. "Very well," he said. "Mr. Ransom's silence had value." "Value to who?" "To whoever feared exposure." "That's not a name." "No, it is not," Wolfe said. He reached for the envelope that had arrived that morning, the fingerprint cards we'd requested from the Department of Warshipping, courtesy of a well-timed call to an old acquaintance. He passed it to me. I opened it, laid the cards out on the desk, and angled them toward Kramer. "These are official records," Wolfe said, "from the 1944 manifests at Pier 41. Among them, a print signed by Clive Ransom, and another," Wolfe paused, "belonging to a man recorded as Alejandro Santillan." Kramer's eyes narrowed. "Go on." "We believe," Wolfe said, "that this Alejandro Santillan was not who he claimed to be." "That's a hell of a statement." "It is also a logical one. His wife believes she buried an empty casket, that the body was never shown, that no autopsy was performed." "She told you that?" "She did." "And you believed her?" "I believe," Wolfe said, "that a man who wishes to disappear leaves behind confusion, not closure. And Ransom was one of the few who might have known whether Santillan left the country at all." Kramer's brow furrowed. "You're saying Santillan faked his death?" "I'm suggesting it's possible he never died." "Then who was buried?" "I suspect," Wolfe said, "no one." Kramer rubbed his temple. "You're not suggesting this ties to that fire at the East Yard?" "Not suggesting. I am stating." "Damn it, Wolfe, that was ruled an accident." "Was it?" Wolfe asked. "Or was it the incineration of a truth no one wanted recorded?" Kramer looked at the fingerprint cards again. "And you want me to run these?" "Yes." "And you think it'll show the man buried in Buenos Aires wasn't the same man who signed this manifest?" "I believe the prints will differ," Wolfe said. "And if they do, you will have proof that someone used Santillan's name, perhaps even his papers." "And Ransom knew." Wolfe inclined his head. Enough, Kramer said, standing. Enough to get me reamed for opening a cold case in wartime logistics. Or enough to finally close one. He grabbed his hat and jammed it on. This is a long shot. Yes, Wolfe said, but you've taken longer ones. Kramer paused at the threshold. If this goes nowhere, and you're wrong, I will withdraw entirely, Wolfe said, and you may scold me over pork shoulder. I'll hold you to that. He turned, hesitated. One last thing, he said. Yes? If Ransom feared reprisal, why didn't he go to the police? Wolfe exhaled, slow and deliberate. Because, Inspector, he said, when a man holds proof of another's crime, and that crime implicates someone still alive, he doesn't call the police. Kramer stared. He hides. He stalls. He tries to decide whether silence is safer than truth. He stepped out, and Clive Ransom, Wolfe said behind him, waited too long. The door clicked shut. The office fell still. I reached forward and gathered the fingerprint cards. You think Kramer will actually run them? He must. And if they match? Then, Wolfe said, someone lied to the Bureau in 1944, which means they were protected. By who? He closed his eyes. That, he said, is what we must find out. I filed the cards, watched the rain hit the window, and felt the room grow just a few degrees colder. I found the auction house in a former carriage works on the Lower East Side. 4 stories of dust, brass railings, and quiet desperation. The interior smelled of lemon oil and pipe smoke. A lean man in a mustard waistcoat met me at the desk, one brow permanently arched, like he'd been born skeptical and aged into it. Yes, sir, he said. His voice was clipped, nasal. You're seeking what? I produced the receipt Wolfe had managed to extract from a customs clerk with far too much pride and far too little coffee. This lot, I said, sold 3 days ago, from a warehouse estate near the docks. He inspected the paper as though it had insulted his father. I remember it, he said. Damaged leather. Charred on one side. Quite unpleasant. The odour lingered. Who consigned it? He smirked. We don't share consignor identities. I leaned forward. This is for Mr. Nero Wolfe. He blinked once. And this is his legman, I said, with a hat full of questions and an afternoon free of patience. He didn't smile, but he didn't argue either. He reached beneath the counter, thumbed through a small logbook, and tilted it toward me without letting go. The consignor was a salvage company, Mariner and Gold, listed at an address I knew for a fact had burned down 2 months prior. The sale was part of a job lot. Desk drawers, ceramic shards, a half-melted clock, and the aforementioned suitcase. Buyer? I asked. He slid another page forward. Miss Yvette Radovich, paid in cash. Did she leave a number? No, sir. Pick up? She collected the suitcase herself, took a cab from outside. I thanked him, asked for the address on file, and left him squinting after me as I stepped into the fading light of 3rd Avenue. Radovich lived on Delancey in a walk-up above a bakery that smelled like damp rye and burnt sugar. She answered the door in a crimson housecoat, hair pinned back in a rush, cigarette clamped between 2 fingers. If it's about the radio license, she said, I've paid it. I introduced myself, keeping the hat low and tone civil. Wolfe sent you? She asked. The orchid man? Yes, ma'am. She sighed and opened the door wider. Well, come in, but I've only got coffee, unless you count vermouth. I stepped into a cramped sitting room scattered with rolled rugs and books on South American exports. The suitcase sat on a sideboard, blackened, cracked along one edge, the brass clasps dulled but intact. She saw me glance at it. You want it open? If you wouldn't mind. She fetched a thin key from a jar labelled vitamins and popped the locks. Inside, a velvet pouch of tarnished silver flatware, the kind used at long-forgotten diplomatic dinners. The handles were scorched, the tines bent, but beneath the pouch, tucked under the lining, was a sealed oilskin envelope. Mind if I take a look? Be my guest. I opened it on the coffee table. 3 pages, Spanish, typed, yellowed from heat but legible. The dates, June 1946. The letterhead, Banco Central de la República Argentina. Doble firmeza, I read aloud. She tilted her head. What's that? Double strength, or in this case, double assurance. It's a bond clause, a trick used in high-level transfers to mask liability. Two parties sign, one pays, the other receives. But if it goes south, no one can prove which party initiated. She blinked at me. Sounds slippery. It is. The documents referenced an account in Buenos Aires. One transfer to a man named Carrillo, the other unsigned, anonymous. I looked up. Where did you find this? In the suitcase, under the liner. I was going to burn it. The thing stank like a stovepipe. But then I felt something shifting in the base. Tore it open. Found that. She stubbed her cigarette and crossed her legs. I didn't know if it mattered. It does. Enough to get me in trouble. Depends who you tell. She lit another cigarette. You're telling Wolfe? He'll want to see it. Will he pay? I didn't blink. He might. That night I returned to the brownstone just after 8. Fritz was wiping down the banisters. Wolfe, as expected, was in the office, seated, satisfied, and glaring at a manuscript on orchid taxonomy as though it owed him money. I laid the envelope on his desk. He didn't speak. He untied the string, drew out the pages, and unfolded them with the care of a man reading the will of an enemy he hadn't expected to die. I waited. At the end of page 2, he paused. His lips curved, barely, but enough to qualify as an expression in his glacial catalogue of emotions. This, he said, is gratifying. Proof? Not quite, but momentum. He adjusted his spectacles. This clause, he murmured, tapping the type, was designed to conceal intent, and yet, in concealing it, they reveal the structure of the conspiracy. I leaned on the back of the red chair. Ransom knew? Wolfe looked up. He knew the mechanics, perhaps not the participants, but enough to be dangerous. And Santillan? He paused. If this clause governed his transfers, Wolfe said, then the funds were never his to control. He was a signatory, but not the source. I frowned. So who was? He glanced at the far wall, the globe, the bookshelves, the unlit lamp. That, he said, is our next step. He reached for the envelope again, folded the documents along the same creases, and slid them into a leather folder Fritz had once used to hold dinner menus for visiting dignitaries. I waited. I want a list, he said. Of? Argentine consuls residing in New York in 1946. Why? Because, Wolfe said, one of them likely guaranteed this transaction, and guarantees, Mr. Goodwin, are not given lightly. I sat. So what are we calling this? He looked at me. The clause? No, I said. The case. He permitted a longer smile. The ashen suitcase, he said, and I knew we were getting close. The cab left me on East 68th, just past York. A thin wind swept from the river and clipped my jaw like an insult. I checked the number twice. The building stood narrow and greyed by weather, a pre-war walk-up with black railings, cracked limestone, and a brass intercom polished too often by nervous thumbs. The name on the second bell read E. Thorne. I pressed it. A pause. Then, yes? Elise Thorne. My name's Archie Goodwin. I work with Mr. Nero Wolfe. Longer pause. What do you want? To talk about Alejandro Santillan. Privately. The silence was neither brief nor friendly. I heard a click. The buzzer sounded like it regretted its job. Inside, the stairs creaked like protest. I counted 5 flights. She met me at the door. Elise Thorne had once been the kind of woman cabbies noticed. Now she was the kind they forgot. Her hair was pinned back in a no-nonsense twist, streaked with silver and the memory of auburn. She wore a high-necked blouse, charcoal slacks, and shoes meant for speed rather than grace. She looked tired in a way that didn't invite sympathy. You said Wolfe. Yes, ma'am. She stepped aside. I followed her in. The apartment was clean, shadowed, and aggressively silent. The windows were curtained in navy wool. A lamp glowed on a table beside a single leather armchair. No couch, no radio, no art. A room meant to be left alone. She didn't offer coffee. I waited. She finally gestured to a spindle-back chair and sat herself on a stiff ottoman. I haven't seen Alejandro in 12 years, she said. Not since 43. Not in person. But you corresponded. Once, maybe twice. He didn't write often. I opened my notebook. You were his secretary. For a while, from 38 to late 41. He worked through Westlake and Brothers, one of the smaller brokerages handling overseas asset acquisition. Argentina mostly, later Brazil. He managed risk portfolios, agricultural, logistics, commodities. I raised a brow. Fancy words for laundering? Her mouth twitched. Not then. Back then it was legal to invest in sugar futures and ignore where the sugar came from. Politics hadn't caught up yet. I nodded. And you were close? She frowned. Her gaze settled on a frayed patch of carpet. I was in love with him. He wasn't in love with me. I didn't write that down. She looked up. I thought he was, for a time. He was charming, careful, quiet, polite in a way that confused people. He had a fondness for books about exile, Ovid, Conrad, Zweig. Zweig? I asked. He said if you want to understand a man who leaves a country behind, read Stefan Zweig. I let that linger. And you believe he was planning to leave Argentina? Yes. Why? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood, crossed the room and opened a drawer in the writing desk. She returned with a cream-coloured envelope, sealed but not addressed. May I? She nodded. Inside was a single sheet of bond paper. The watermark, Westlake and Brothers. The ink, blue, typed, but the final line was handwritten in a looping, elegant script. My darling, this city is a vault with no key, but I have the key because it's you. Wait for me. I have nearly done it. Love makes a coward brave. There was no signature. His? I asked. She nodded. Typed by him? No. His Spanish was fluent, but his English wasn't strong enough for that phrasing. It was someone else. Someone? Someone he met through the firm. I don't know her name. Only that she lived here, New York. She worked indirectly through Westlake. Bond transfers, perhaps. Quiet ones. Married? Almost certainly. I folded the letter carefully. Why show me this now? Because you asked, and because he was trying to escape. Escape what? She blinked, once. Argentina. The war was ending. Perón's grip was tightening. Alejandro saw the writing on the wall. He wanted to disappear. He said America was cleaner. That was a lie, of course, but it was his lie. And this woman was part of his plan. He told me so. I let the air go silent again. Do you remember anything else about her? Hair colour, accent? No, but she wore gloves in summer, always. I wrote that down. Elise folded her hands tightly. There was one thing, she said. One evening, Alejandro left the office early. I followed. He met someone at the Central Park Mall near the bandstand. A woman in grey with a scarf and gloves. She handed him something. He didn't see me. What did she hand him? I couldn't see, but he tucked it into his coat like it was warm. You never told him you followed. She shook her head. No. Why? Her voice thinned. Because I loved him. I nodded slowly. Do you think she betrayed him? I think love makes people foolish. But betrayal? No. That's deliberate, cold. I stood. She didn't. You're planning to tell Wolfe? Yes. Will he care? I met her gaze. If it helps the case, yes. If it doesn't, no. She smiled, the saddest expression I'd seen all week. Then tell him I said hello. He'll remember. At the door, she touched my sleeve. Mr. Goodwin. Yes? There was another reason I kept that letter. What's that? To remind myself that love letters rarely end in happy endings. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office halfway through a bottle of Gewürztraminer and wholly uninterested in conversation. I laid the letter on his desk. He read it twice, said nothing. Then, the phrase, a vault with no key, does it strike you as literal? It might. He tapped the page. And these initials, there are none. Precisely. He leaned back, fingers steepled. Miss Thorne's description? Reliable, bitter, sharp. He nodded. Did she mention Westlake by name? Yes. Then we have our junction. I frowned. Between? Emotion, he said, and money. By the time I reached the offices of Westlake and Brothers, the sun had no plans of staying. Midtown was slipping into the kind of dusk that liked to keep secrets. The brass plaque beside the lobby elevator was polished, quiet, and nervous, just like the receptionist who watched me cross the parquet floor like I might track in judgment. I gave the name Everett Mallory, and a moment later, I was in. The office was masculine and plain, oak panels, a steel filing cabinet that looked recently bought but never used, and a desk too wide for friendship. Everett Mallory stood behind it, not bothering with pretense. He was a man of parts, none of them warm. Tall, with clipped grey hair and a face made for denying mortgages, Mallory had the look of a man who preferred the Atlantic to people. "You're with Mr. Wolfe," he said, without offering a hand. "Sit." I did. The guest chair was hard enough to discourage lingering. "I'm following up on a report," I said. "Alejandro Santillán. We were told he may have had investment ties through your office, transfers dating back to 1944, possibly earlier." He didn't blink. He did. That was it. No squirm, no cough. I've seen Stone confess with more emotion. "May I ask," I said, "what those ties entailed?" Mallory sat. Santillán had assets. Agricultural profits mostly. Tracts in Misiones. Shipments through Bahia Blanca. He was laundering war money. War money? German capital through Argentine brokers. Post-Krieg remnant accounts. Not uncommon. And legal? Then, technically. Now, no. I adjusted the angle of my hat to catch his eyes. "You didn't object?" He smiled, and it wasn't charitable. I objected as far as our boardroom required, no further. I took out my notebook but didn't write. Instead, I let the pen hover. "Did your firm ever have personal dealings with Mr. Santillán?" "Yes." "Private dealings?" "Yes." "And that doesn't concern you?" He leaned back. "If we refused every foreigner with a muddy ledger, we'd be filing bankruptcy by now. My job wasn't morality, it was balance sheets." "And now he's dead." That got the first reaction, a slight flare in the nostrils. "Is that official?" "You read the paper?" He didn't answer. I tried the next lever. "We have reason to believe he was planning to re-enter the United States." "Interesting," Mallory said, with the tone of someone who wasn't. "Do you recall any efforts from him in that direction? Attempts to repatriate funds, quiet partnerships?" A pause, then, "Yes." "How quiet?" Mallory turned to a drawer. From it he retrieved a single folder, thin, cream-coloured, held with a navy band. He laid it on the desk without sliding it forward. "A memorandum," he said. "Signed but not executed. March 1946. He wanted to establish a trust, property-based, diversified, New York and Connecticut." "In whose name?" Mallory met my eyes. It was blank. I let that settle. "He never returned to complete it?" "No." "Why not?" "He said," Mallory replied, "that the weather was colder than expected." I gave a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Poetic?" "No," Mallory said. "Practical. Cold climates confuse liars." I filed that one away. "And did anyone else show interest in those accounts? Relatives? Lawyers?" Mallory tapped a paperweight. "A woman, Latin, well-dressed, middle-30s, spoke excellent English, came to inquire, nothing formal." "Name?" "I didn't ask." "Why not?" "She didn't offer." My tone shifted. "And if I told you that woman's name was Veronica?" That made him blink, but just once. "I'd say you have sources I don't." "You met her?" He nodded. "More than once?" "3 times. All within 2 months before Santillán's supposed death." "Supposed?" "I don't believe in accidents." That turned the air colder. "Why did she come?" "She asked about the memorandum." "And you told her?" "I told her the trust was unsigned and therefore worthless." "And?" "She smiled, said something about trust always being worthless, and left." I stood. "You're not worried this conversation might come back to haunt you?" "I'm already haunted," Mallory said, without inflection. "That's what money does." I looked at the folder. "May I?" "No." "Copy?" "No." "Summary?" He sighed. "Property in Westchester. A modest building on East 72nd. Partial equity in a shipping co-op near the wharf. No names?" "Only initials. A.S." "And you're sure it was his?" Mallory gave me the expression of a man bored by obviousness. "He dictated it in my presence." That closed the door. I tipped my hat and turned, then paused at the threshold. "Did you ever speak to Veronica after he died?" Mallory's tone lowered. "No, nor do I wish to." "Why not?" "Because the last time she looked at me, I felt she could see through my suit." I let myself out. The city had gone purple with twilight. I walked 2 blocks before hailing a cab, the image of a woman with no name burning through the fog of my thoughts. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe didn't rise when I entered. He glanced up, noted the time, and gestured with 2 fingers for the report. I gave it, stripped of theatre. When I finished, he closed his eyes. "I dislike men like Mallory," he said. "Because they tell the truth?" "Because they use it like a weapon." He tapped a finger on the arm of the chair. "And you didn't tell him Veronica was alive?" "No." "Good. The lie serves us better than the fact. For now." "What's next?" He opened his eyes. "We find the property on East 72nd. Even if the trust wasn't signed?" "Especially because it wasn't." He lifted his voice a fraction. "Fritz, beer for Mr. Goodwin." In the kitchen, glass met brass. As the sound settled, Wolfe added, almost gently, "Mr. Saint-Hilaire never expected to die. He expected to disappear." I nodded. "Like weather," I said. He grunted. "No, weather comes back." When Veronica returned to the brownstone, it was with the composure of someone walking into a room already on fire. She was dressed in a charcoal suit that made her look part widow, part diplomat, and carried a single leather envelope, creased only at the fold. Archie held the door and said nothing. Fritz did not appear. Wolfe did not rise. He only nodded once toward the red chair opposite him, the yellow chair across from it already occupied by his bulk. "I have something," she said. "You often do," Wolfe replied. She placed the envelope on the edge of the desk. "It was left in Buenos Aires with a notary. He contacted me after receiving word about the death." Archie, stationed beside the bookshelves, asked softly, "This notary knew to wait?" "Yes. Alejandro gave instructions that it was not to be opened unless he failed to return by a specific date. That date passed 2 weeks ago." Wolfe grunted, reached forward, and slid the envelope closer using only 2 fingers. He examined the seal, a mottled black wax, stamped with an unfamiliar crest. "You opened it?" "Only once," Veronica said. "I resealed it before bringing it here. I thought, if you were to see it, it should be in its original condition." He broke the seal with his thumb. The paper inside was thick, handwritten in deliberate strokes, bearing the ornate flourish of a Buenos Aires notary beneath an official embossment. A separate sheet had been folded alongside it, handwritten in a different ink, clipped to the main document with a rusted pin. Wolfe did not read it aloud. He examined it in silence for over 3 minutes. Archie, noting the shift in his expression, a small, almost imperceptible tilt of the brow, finally said, "Trouble?" "No," Wolfe murmured. "Revelation." He turned the document over and tapped the second page. "A will," he said, "executed in 1946, in Argentina. It supersedes the one filed here in 1943. Veronica nodded once. "I suspected as much." "This document," Wolfe continued, "names no family, no wife, no children, no heirs of blood. Instead," he raised the page, "it names 6 numerical accounts, all within United States borders." He shifted slightly in the chair, the leather protesting. Citizenship requirements at the time would have made this inconvenient, but not impossible. Archie stepped closer. "Who are the beneficiaries?" "There are none," Wolfe said. "The accounts are simply listed. No disbursement instructions, no percentages, no signatures for execution, but—" He tapped the final line with a finger. "There is a clause." Veronica stirred. "I know it." Wolfe read it aloud. "If I vanish, the truth is in the fire." Archie exhaled through his nose. "Not poetic," he said, "just accurate." Wolfe gestured for the page. "Miss Veronica, this line, the phrasing, you're sure it was written by him?" "It's his hand. He used a particular way of looping the capital T. Look at the word truth. You'll see it bends leftward like it's bowing." Wolfe examined it, then passed the paper to Archie, who squinted, nodded, and placed it flat on the desk. "Truth," Wolfe said, "and fire." Archie sat, crossing one leg over the other. "We've seen both," he said. "Warehouse fire, South Docks, just before his supposed return, just after the assets were moved. Veronica leaned forward. Supposed? Wolfe didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the phone and dialed by memory. Saul Panzer, he said. Come, bring your Argentinian contact, the one with the diplomatic uncle. Yes, 30 minutes. He set the receiver down, then turned back to the desk. There is a chance, he said, however remote, that the accounts were only placeholders, diversions. But if this document is authentic, and I believe it is, then it stands to reason Mr. Santillan had no intention of returning to reclaim them. Veronica's voice was soft. He wanted someone else to. Wolfe grunted. Yes, but not family, not you, not anyone by blood. Archie tapped the document. Those accounts. Have we traced them? Not yet, but Mr. Panzer will begin. He turned to Veronica. Miss, do you recognize the numbers? She shook her head. No, but I can tell you where they were first mentioned. Archie straightened. Go on. Veronica clasped her hands together. In the months before Alejandro left Argentina, he began compiling ledgers, quietly, not financial, philosophical, lists of names, excerpts from newspapers, police bulletins, cargo manifests. There was a box, always locked. I never saw inside it, but I saw him carry it to a freighter the day he left for New York. Wolfe's voice was low. A freighter? Yes, not a passenger vessel. He didn't want to be seen. Wolfe nodded once, as if this confirmed a private suspicion. And the fire? He asked. Veronica blinked. What about it? Your second will, he said. The line, if I vanish, the truth is in the fire. What did he mean? She took a breath. In 1945, she said, a government facility burned in Mendoza. It was never in the newspapers, officially. But there were whispers. Files were destroyed. War files, shipments, names. Some said it was sabotage. Archie's voice sharpened. German names. Veronica nodded. Yes, medical, engineering, logistics. There were rumours that those files were copied before the fire, that someone smuggled them out. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. And you think that someone was Alejandro? I don't know, she said. But he came back from Mendoza with burn marks on his right hand. He never said why. The room fell still. The air, even in the brownstone, turned heavy. Fritz entered silently with a tray of beer. Wolfe waved it toward Archie, who took his, unthinking. Veronica, Wolfe said, your presence here has changed the course of our inquiry. She looked at him. Will it help him? No, Wolfe said plainly, but it may explain him. She stood slowly. Then I've done all I can. Wolfe nodded. I will send for you when we know more. She turned. Archie walked her to the door. When he returned, Wolfe was already staring out the window, the will still resting on his lap. She didn't ask for money, Archie said. No. She didn't ask for a share of the accounts. No. Then what did she want? Wolfe folded the will precisely. Closure, he said. That infernal human need. He leaned back. Bring me Saul when he arrives, and the photograph from the warehouse, frame 3. I want to look again at what was burning. Archie hesitated. You think this all links back to the fire here? Wolfe didn't answer. He only closed his eyes and whispered, Truth is never the flame, only the smoke that rises after. The air in the brownstone office was still, heavy with the scent of orchid bark and old tobacco. Wolfe sat in his yellow chair with a glass of beer untouched beside him. The curtains were drawn against the afternoon sun, casting the room in a muted amber that softened none of its gravity. Fritz had polished the desk twice that morning. There was a hush about the place, as though it too knew what was coming. I had made the calls early, respectfully, firmly. No elaboration, no negotiation. Wolfe had given a list and I'd carried it out. Westlake, Mallory, Elise Thorne, Veronica, Harold Deems. A circle, he called it, not a net, not yet. Now the chairs were filled. Westlake, stiff in posture, attempted indifference but failed. His shoes betrayed a nervous tapping. Elise Thorne wore gloves, though the heat outside had no courtesy. Mallory sat too straight, arms crossed like a schoolboy waiting for correction. Deems, blank-faced and dry-palmed, watched the rug. Veronica, the only one who looked directly at Wolfe, had folded her hands neatly in her lap, betraying nothing. Wolfe began without preface. You are here because you are necessary. No more, no less. He didn't look up as he spoke. His gaze remained on the folded parchment resting on the edge of the desk, the Argentine will. You each played a role, knowingly or not, in the affair surrounding Alejandro Santillán. A breath, perhaps Elise Thorne's, shook faintly in the quiet. His death was reported, his accounts were frozen, his legacy dissected, and yet he never died. Now Wolfe looked up. It was not theatrical, it was final. There was no immediate reaction. It was too large a statement for noise. Wolfe let the silence stretch, then continued. A man died in the fire at the warehouse near the southern pier. His remains were never formally identified. Assumptions were made, helpfully, conveniently. And afterward, a man named Denton Westlake emerged with documents, funds and assets, all tracing back to Alejandro Santillán's holdings. At this, Westlake stirred. I object, he said quickly. I've explained this. I was a legal beneficiary, and no, you were not, Wolfe said. You were a fabrication. I crossed to the side table and laid down a manila folder. Wolfe didn't touch it. Mr. Westlake, he said, or rather, Señor Santillán, you underestimated the difficulty of inventing a man in America. Westlake stood. You're insane. Wolfe didn't blink. You had plastic surgery performed in Buenos Aires. The man who died in the fire, your double, was a black market accountant whose body was burned beyond recognition. You paid well to ensure the coroner had no reason to question the remains. You even ensured a dental record was created posthumously. Sloppy. Veronica leaned forward, her voice barely a whisper. You staged it? Wolfe turned slightly toward her. He did. The fire was not simply destruction, it was rebirth. Denton Westlake rose from those ashes with Alejandro's fortune, his ledgers, and a new face. I opened the folder. The top photo was grainy but legible, taken from the freighter's manifest in 1946. A man boarding, face turned. Beneath it, a passport application from 6 months later. Different name, different face, same scar on the wrist. I passed them one by one. Elise Thorne paled. That's not possible. Wolfe's voice was low. You arranged the first transfer of funds to Westlake. At the time, you believed you were acting under duress. But you had met Alejandro once, had you not? Her reply was faint. Years before, in Mendoza. And yet, you never questioned the coincidence, she faltered. It was his eyes. I thought I was imagining things. You were not. Wolfe turned to Harold Deems. And you, sir, you certified the legal documents. How well did you know the deceased? Deems blinked. He was introduced to me by Miss Thorne. The paperwork was in order. No doubt it was. Wolfe took up the parchment and held it gently by the corners. This is the second will, executed in Argentina, months before the supposed death. It outlines not bequests, but instructions, safeguards, accounts. He folded it precisely. Written by Alejandro Santillán, not a man who planned to die, a man who planned to disappear. Westlake, Santillán, finally spoke, voice tight. You have no right. You think this makes you righteous? You have no idea what it cost. Wolfe did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice was unflinching. I have some idea. I know it cost a man his life. I know it required suborning a coroner, a clerk, a bank officer, and at least one maritime official. And I know it left a trail, no matter how carefully you swept. Westlake's expression shifted from defiance to weariness. There were people, he said, people who would never stop looking. You don't know what it was like in 45 in Mendoza. I did what I had to do. Indeed, Wolfe said. Then he paused, looked at Veronica. You suspected? She nodded. Her voice trembled. He came to my door 2 years ago, said he was someone else, but he asked about my father's horses. No one knew that. No one but Alejandro. Wolfe folded his hands. It is over now. Westlake slumped, not with surrender, but with release. I never wanted the money, he said, only the silence. Wolfe said nothing. The room held its breath. Mallory cleared his throat. What happens now? Wolfe looked to me. Mr. Goodwin. I nodded once. Saul is downstairs, the police have been informed, everything's in order. Wolfe rose, slowly, deliberately. You are free to go, except for Mr. Westlake. I opened the door. The circle broke. Elise Thorne rose first, eyes on the carpet. Mallory followed, stiff-backed. Deems did not speak. Veronica lingered. She did not speak to him, only looked once and walked out. Westlake remained seated, staring at his hands. Wolfe sat again and reached for his beer. "Archie," he said, "have Fritz prepare sandwiches. I have no wish to discuss Argentina any further." "Yes, sir," I said, and closed the door behind me. The afternoon rain had passed, but its shadow still lingered on the brownstone's front steps, dampening the air with a clinging coolness. Inside, the office was a theatre of precision. Wolfe in his yellow chair, hands steepled, I at my desk, a freshly lit cigar held just long enough to waste the match, and across from us, in the red chairs, the final cast assembled. Elise Thorne sat with her back stiff and her gloved fingers laced. Veronica's posture betrayed nothing, but her eyes moved constantly, tracking Wolfe's expression like a metronome. Mallory, suit rumpled from an earlier shower, sat furthest from the desk, arms folded and jaw clenched. Kramer, invited but standing, leaned by the bookcase with the casual certainty of a man holding live ammunition. Wolfe began with no throat clearing, no ceremony. "Mr. Kramer." Kramer stepped forward. From an envelope in his coat, he withdrew a sheet, heavy, matte, already creased. "This," he said, "was taken in 1943, a dinner at the Mendoza Hotel. Alejandro Santillan seated fourth from the left." He handed it to Wolfe, who laid it gently on the desk, then slid it toward Elise. "You remember this evening?" Elise nodded once curtly. "Yes." "You kept it?" Her eyes narrowed. "I was there." "You also kept the place card. You pressed it between pages of a book you never finished, and it bore a print." He nodded toward Kramer. The bureau confirmed, right thumb, compared against the New York Passport Office records from 1949, filed under the name Denton Westlake. Mallory shifted. His shoe scraped the floor. Veronica's voice was a blade, low and sudden. "Fingerprint?" Wolfe turned his head slightly. "A match. Absolute." Kramer folded his arms. He wasn't exactly careful. The print on the wine glass from Elise's apartment last week matched too. "You serve red in those oversized goblets, Miss Thorne." Elise flinched. Not visibly, but enough for Wolfe to catch it. He continued. "More damning than fingerprints, however, is the letter." He reached into the drawer and removed a folded page. Pale blue, aged at the edges. It was not for theatrics. The paper had its own authority. "Elise, you told Archie it was only a note. It is, in fact, a love letter, dated July 2nd, 1946, postmarked from Rosario." I passed it to her. She held it as if it were hot. The silence in the room stretched thin. Elise read quickly. Her breath caught halfway through. Her gloved fingers began to shake, not with fear, with memory. When she spoke, it was barely audible. He said he would come back." Her voice cracked. "I helped him disappear because he said it was temporary, that it would all pass, that he'd be safe, and then we could leave together." Kramer muttered, "Jesus." Veronica blinked. Her words came without pause. "You knew? All these years?" Elise did not look at her. "I knew he wasn't dead. I didn't know who he became. He never told me that. Only that it was safer if I didn't ask." Wolfe spoke with grave clarity. "You wired funds. You forged his death certificate." Elise looked up, cheeks flushed. "I thought he'd come back. I didn't think he'd become this." Mallory stood abruptly. "Enough. You can't pin this all on her." Wolfe didn't move. "No one is pinning anything, Mr. Mallory, but perhaps you'd like to explain your role." Mallory's mouth opened, closed. He looked at Veronica, then away. His voice cracked like a worn door hinge. "I figured it out. Not at once. It took time. There were gaps, money moving where it shouldn't, Elise going silent for months. But when I saw the signature on the Westlake contracts, when I saw it twice, side by side with Santillan's from 1944, I knew." He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I told myself it didn't matter. The firm was stable. The assets were clean. It wasn't my place." Veronica's voice turned brittle. "You knew Alejandro was alive, and you said nothing? To me?" Mallory met her eyes. He looked 30 years older. He was dangerous, not the man you remembered, and he'd made his choice. She rose slowly. His choice? The question hung unanswered. She crossed the room, took the letter from Elise's hand, and read it in full. She read quickly, lips barely moving. When she was done, she folded it once and set it on the desk. "Did you sleep with him?" she asked Elise flatly. Elise's chin dipped. "Yes." "For how long?" Wolfe intervened quietly. "That is not germane." Veronica turned on him. "Everything is germane. You think this is just a puzzle to be solved, but these were people. He let me believe he was dead. For 8 years. Wolfe did not rise to it. He let everyone believe it, because his existence was no longer compatible with truth. He became someone else. Veronica laughed once, a harsh, ugly sound. And did he love her? No one answered. Wolfe reached for his beer. His tone had cooled. "You were the ward of the man you loved, and you never questioned his will." Veronica's breath caught. "I was 21. I thought it was for my good, that he trusted me with his name." Mallory lowered himself back into his chair slowly. "I never wanted this to come out. The firm," Wolfe cut him off with a wave, "is intact, but its foundations were built on deception. Your silence preserved that lie." I reached into the file and laid the last item on the desk. A photograph. Elise, Alejandro and Veronica. Taken in 1942. A garden. Springtime. Elise looked away. Wolfe regarded it for a moment, then spoke. "Truth is not always revelation. Sometimes it is the end of pretense." He stood, heavy and slow. "This affair is concluded. Mr. Kramer?" Kramer nodded. "I've got enough for the DA to chew on, but it's going to be quiet. International layers, statute questions, missing witnesses. Westlake, Santillan is already in custody. But Miss Thorne's cooperation helps." He looked at her. "You'll give a statement." Elise gave a faint nod. Mallory said nothing. Veronica, voice cold, asked, "What happens to the money?" Wolfe turned to me. "Archie?" I closed the file. "The Argentine accounts have been frozen. Anything withdrawn after 4/6 is under review. The estate is back under legal scrutiny." Wolfe resumed his seat. "This concludes the confrontation. The facts are now facts." He picked up the photograph, studied it. 3 people in sunlight. 1 vanished, 1 waited. 1 was lied to. He set it down gently. "No one is innocent, but the illusion is broken." Fritz opened the door. "Dinner, sir." Wolfe rose slowly. "Thank you, Fritz. We are finished here." He did not look back. Veronica didn't slam the door when she left. That sort of drama didn't suit her. She stepped out with the same quiet force that brought her in. Shoulders set, coat sharp, face unreadable. A widow now, in name and memory. Kramer didn't move from his spot by the bookshelf. He watched her go, chewing the inside of his cheek like it owed him money. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, just tired. Wolfe sat unmoved in his yellow chair, hands folded, chin tucked. His gaze had dropped to the empty spot Veronica's chair had occupied. "I presume," he said, "that you will exercise discretion." Kramer let out a breath through his nose. It sounded like a valve releasing. "I'll exercise something," he muttered. "Westlake's already in custody. The passport charges alone will hold him. Fraud, obstruction, God knows what else." "And the matter of Mr. Ransom?" Wolfe asked. Kramer's jaw twitched. "Autopsy confirms blunt trauma. No water in the lungs, so the river dump was post-mortem. The kid didn't fall. Someone wanted him quiet. And after our little gathering here, I've got a fair idea who." Wolfe didn't reply. He reached for his beer instead. I set down my pen. The notes were done. What remained now was the aftertaste. Kramer pushed off the bookshelf. "Look, I'll follow the string, see how far back it ties. But Santillan, Westlake, whatever name he likes this week, he's going to rot. Elise Thorne may have played accomplice, but I can't prove she touched the boy. Yet." He looked at Wolfe. "You keeping clean on this?" Wolfe's brows rose. "I do not obstruct justice, Inspector. I merely refrain from galloping after it." Kramer grunted. "Yeah, well, if you remember anything gallop-worthy, send word." He turned toward the hall. Fritz met him at the threshold, wordless, and let him out with the minimum ceremony. No rain outside this time, just the kind of cold that made your collar feel too thin. Wolfe drained the last of his glass and set it gently on the blotter. "Archie." "Yes, sir?" He closed his eyes for a moment. "Do not permit the world to weigh this as balance." I waited. He opened them again. "The law will handle Westlake. That is not justice. It is rectification." I let that sit. It deserved to. The air in the room had changed, denser somehow, like the walls had pulled tighter around us. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain slightly. The sidewalk outside was empty. No Veronica. No echo. "She didn't cry," I said. Wolfe's voice was quiet. "She has, I imagine, spent her tears." I turned back to face him. She still loved him. "Possibly," he paused. "Or perhaps she loved the version of him she was allowed to remember." That tracked. We didn't say much after that. No cause to. Some cases end in a shout. Others like this dissolve at the edges, leaving behind no answer that makes anyone feel better. I went to the kitchen. Fritz was drying silver. "You'll stay for supper?" "Try keeping me away." I took my usual chair at the dining table. He brought trout in parchment and a bottle from the colder end of the cellar. Wolfe joined us, punctual as ever, though he said little. That was fine. The meal passed in quiet efficiency. Afterwards, Wolfe excused himself for the plant rooms. The orchids don't ask questions, and he's always preferred their company when things get complicated. I returned to the office. The desk still held the imprint of the day, file folders slightly ajar, a note in Veronica's hand, unsigned, left behind like a pressed leaf. The photograph we'd found in Elise's possession, Alejandro, Veronica and Elise in a garden, all sunshine and silence, sat face down beside the blotter. I lit a cigar and sat. The clock ticked soft. Sometimes justice looks like a jail cell. Sometimes it looks like a widow in a dark coat, walking out alone into a city that's already forgotten the man she buried twice. There's no real victory in that. Just a sense of something ending and something colder beginning. I smoked in silence until the stub grew too hot to hold. Then I leaned back and let the ash settle. Somewhere upstairs, Wolfe watered orchids and the house held its breath. The brownstone that evening had the feel of a sealed book. Fritz moved with quiet precision between kitchen and office, the sound of glass touching wood the only disruption as he set the beer down. Wolfe did not look up. He was reclined in the yellow chair, a weighty volume propped on his stomach, something thick-bound and Latin-lettered. The subject was South American inheritance law, and I knew better than to interrupt it with anything short of combustion. He turned a page. On the desk, the scorched ledger, corners blackened but still legible in the middle, sealed. Beside it, the forged will, catalogued and bagged by Kramer's team. And the suitcase, its false bottom revealed, its secrets airless and old, sat tagged and inert, awaiting transfer to evidence, the last of it, all on the same surface where the case had begun. I was at the window watching a taxi idle at the curb. No one got out. The street lamp above it flickered once, then held. Outside, Manhattan pulsed, indifferent. "Would you like another?" Fritz's voice was low, polite, almost rhetorical. Wolfe shook his head minutely, not turning from the page. "I believe," he said, "this jurisdiction permits dual citizenship, but not dual testamentary obligations." I didn't bother asking what that meant. He would explain it if it mattered, and if it didn't, well, it was still likely true. I lit a cigar. The smoke swirled against the lamplight. Wolfe turned another page, slower this time. Fritz returned to the kitchen. We were left with the ticking of the wall clock and the scent of orchids drifting faintly from upstairs. Wolfe had trimmed them himself that afternoon. He never left that duty to Fritz, not even on days like this. I spoke without turning. "You think she'll go back?" Wolfe grunted, low but discernible. "She may." Silence again. "She won't find what she left behind," I said. "No," he said, "but she may still find what remains." I turned then, leaning against the window frame. She spent 10 years chasing a name, all to learn the man behind it never really lived. Wolfe closed the book. "That, Mr. Goodwin, is one of civilization's crueler gifts, the preservation of illusions through record-keeping." I nodded, though he wasn't looking. The beer sat untouched. The brownstone felt full but not heavy, like a house that had exhaled. Wolfe shifted in his chair. "There is no further risk from the Westlake account." None, I said. He confessed. The passports, the silver, the fire. He laid it out. Kramer has enough to hang a new calendar on him. And Elise? Still claiming ignorance. He lifted a brow. Ignorance, he repeated, is a fragile defence, particularly when typed correspondence is found in one's own drawer. I smiled faintly. They'll charge her. He nodded. A draft stirred the curtains. I stepped back from the window. You were right, I said. Wolfe didn't pretend to misunderstand. Buenos Aires is a long way to come, I said, just to find a lie that lived in Manhattan. He let that linger. The lamplight caught the edge of the beer glass. And yet, he said, most lies are local. It is only the consequences that travel. I moved toward the desk, fingertips brushing the edge of the burned ledger. What will they do with this? He closed the book gently and set it aside. They will shelve it, and in time misplace it. Fritz returned then, quiet as before, bearing a folded napkin and a small dish of almonds. He set them down, gave a respectful nod, and disappeared once more into the calm silence of a house that knows how to keep it. Wolfe rose, slowly, with the care of a man whose joints protested change. Come, he said, the orchids require misting, and you, he glanced at the cigar, require less smoke. I followed him, leaving behind the ledger, the will, and the suitcase, sealed relics of a story that was never meant to be told. If you enjoy these mysteries, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're already subscribed, share this case with someone who'd love a good Nero Wolfe story.